This is the Happy Families podcast with Dr. Justin Coulson. We are Luke and Susie, and this is the podcast for time-poor parents who just want answers now.
Melissa sent us this message. She said, my child, who is 5, was punched in the face by another boy same age at school. I've said that I'll step in if something is not done, but how far should we go? When should we step in? By not doing something, I feel like I'm telling my child that it's okay to have people walk all over you. I don't know whether the mother knows or not. It is a 5-year-old, for goodness sake. How and when should I step in? Dr. Justin Coulson, this is not a happy family situation. This is a mum who doesn't know the right thing to do. And you know what? I reckon this 4, 5, 6 years old is where we as parents learn so much about this very question. When do we step in and when do we let our children figure stuff out?
I think it's a sign of the very best parents, the ones who know when to step in and the ones who know when to step back, the ones who know when to talk and the ones who know when to just be quiet. Just don't say anything.
This is sounding like a Kenny Rogers song.
Know when to hold them. That's right. Yeah.
And know when to walk away.
Yeah,
know when to
that's
run.
it.
The parenting skills.
I've learned in my time as parenting that there is some value to the kids' law, letting children figure some things out by themselves. And
Yeah, but Susie, I've got to say, when a 5-year-old's punching another 5-year-old in the face,
Yes.
it's time to step in.
Yes.
Parents have got to be involved in this.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, we say. So the question is about when and how she should step in. What does stepping in look like? Because I guess on impulse, if your 5-year-old's been punched in the face,
You go and find that 5-year-old, you track them down.
yeah, you grab them by the throat, you hold them against the wall. Yeah,
No.
no.
Oh, golly.
We show them what it
Someone
feels
takes
like.
it too far.
Yeah, it's usually Susie. But what does stepping in actually look
Yeah.
like?
I think that it depends. It depends so much on the situation. I mean, if it happens in the backyard, then you step in and then you deal with it right there with the child. Or perhaps the parents are there and you talk to the parents and say, we need to interact and we need to figure this out together. We've got to, this is not okay.
Yeah.
If you're in a public place like a park, the situation's different. Perhaps their parents look far too scary. And when you walk towards them to talk about it, they grimace at you menacingly and you get your child, get your keys and you get in the car. Or maybe they'll actually come running as well and say, oh my goodness, and they won't be able to believe that their child's done that.
Yeah, and I think in that scenario where we're there and we see exactly what happens, it's almost easier to determine when to step in and when not. But what if it happens at school, you didn't see what happened around the event, you only heard from your child that they got punched in the face from another child, you don't know, as in Melissa's case, whether the other mum even knows that their child did this. What do you do?
This is where it gets really tricky. The school's got to be involved. But I think one of the other challenges that we face here, before we go jumping to conclusions, and I'm sure that Melissa and her family are wonderful, but we don't know, and this is not about blaming the victim. No. Getting punched in the face is not acceptable. End of story, ever. But it's also important for us to understand what's going on in the relationship, what's going on with that child, what's going on with our child. So I would want to be sitting down or having the school sit down to really get what's going on. Has my child been unknowingly upsetting the other child? And is there something that my child can learn from this? I just want to make sure that my child's doing the right thing. Not blaming the victim here, but just making sure that my child's doing the right thing. Second thing that we want to do is the school's got to have some sort of a plan for responding to a child who is violent and aggressive. Now, this is the domain of schools, not the domain of parents.
Yes.
It's happened at school. The school needs to be able to deal with it. And this should, especially at the age of 5, this should usually involve the school letting the other parent know that this is what's gone on. It's so important, though, that when that child goes home, that mum or dad, of the perpetrator, don't say, right, that's it, I'm going to put you through the wall. You don't behave like this. Because I wonder where the kid's learning it from, if that's the case. As parents, if our child's the bully, if our child's the aggressive one, we need to be able to sit down with that child and find out, well, where did this come from? Who showed you this? Have you been watching too many superhero movies?
Yeah.
Research shows that boys in particular are much more likely to be, who are exposed to those movies are much more likely to be violent. They don't pick up the pro-social cues from the superheroes. They just get the violence. Or have they got a big brother or sister who's been beating them up? Or are they seeing some sort of violence in the home? Where has this come from? Maybe they have some sort of a psycho psychopathology, some sort of psychological challenge that is impacting on their behaviour. We need to understand what's going on in the background before we jump to conclusions and say, this kid's a bad kid.
Yeah, and before, even all of those, like there's this assumption that they've picked it up from somewhere. I can talk from my perspective, not as a 5-year-old, but as older, I never saw violence in my home whatsoever. And did I watch some movies? Yes, but I was a violent young teen. But I don't know that I can actually put it down to what I witnessed or saw as much as just an almost human instinct as someone who was scared. What I did was I actually tried to attack before I felt like I was. But in hindsight, I can look at that now. There was fear going on in my life. There was instability. There was this relational stuff that made me act out in a certain way that wasn't because I was a bad kid or wasn't because I was naturally a violent kid or picked up habits per se. I was just trying. It was almost a self-defense mechanism that was kicking in for me.
As a teenager.
Developmentally, there's a big difference between a 5-year-old and a teenager.
Yeah.
And while it's still not acceptable even in a teenager, we have some fairly sound developmental understanding as to why that might be occurring. But for a 5-year-old, it's not really normal behaviour unless there's been some sort of modelling or unless the child is frightened, scared, or very, very upset, sad, worried, and they're lashing out because of that.
And let's face it, we've had 3 boys go through the 5-year-old phase, and just because they say someone punched them in the face, because we've witnessed the times where they said, my brother punched me, and he didn't. He turned around and his shoulder brushed their cheek accidentally, and it was a very different, thing that we saw to what they described.
It's such a boy thing because I've got girls, right? Now I've had 5 of my 6 girls go through that same age group, and I've actually witnessed this where one of the girls walks past the other one, and she goes, because boys punch, right? Boys are a lot more physical.
Yeah.
Girls are a lot more verbal. And I've heard one of the girls say to the other one, "Nye, nye, nye, nye." But as soon as she says that, the other girl goes, "Dad, she just called me an idiot."
Yeah.
And it's like, she didn't say anything like that. She just said nye, nye. But and they do. They now again, I'm not saying that Melissa's little boy is lying about being punched in the face. He may very well have been, but it's so important that we understand what's going on.
Ask some questions before we make
Ask
some
the
statements.
questions. Get the school involved if it's happened at school. Trust the teachers to deal with it. But we want to make sure that child... Oh, last point, really important. We want to make sure that the school and the parents of that child are focused not on hurting him, but on helping him.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And this is such a thing because we don't want to make a big deal out of something that turns out to be nothing. And so we can almost feel like if we get the school involved and the other kids' parents involved, then it turns out it actually wasn't that big a deal. Like we've made an awkward situation for another kid because we've overreacted. But what you're saying is like if we ask some questions, if we have some conversations and we have the focus on let's understand what's going on first and foremost, then it's actually not a big deal. It's just it's sort of learning process for even the adults.
Yeah, look, being punched in the face, I still think is a big deal, but we don't want to make it huge, and we don't want to turn this child into believing that he or she is a bully. What we really want to move towards, and the end goal here, is helping the aggressor and the victim to have a sense of empathy.
Yes.
To be able to take the other person's perspective, not just in this scenario, but in all scenarios moving forward, so that people can be a little more compassionate, a little kinder, even at the age of 5. They can think, this person's feeling like that, and this is a better way to behave.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're getting the school involved, we're getting the other child's parents involved, and we're having this conversation. Let's say at the end of that, everybody else says, or says the right things and then nothing happens and there's no ongoing, and you feel like maybe it's not been taken as seriously as it should have been. Then, like, how much do you escalate and how do you because this is the thing, like, it's all okay while everybody else is doing what we think is appropriate, but we don't get to control other people's actions and responses.
No, we don't. And while many, many schools will do this very well, I hear too many stories of schools who are still struggling with this and who are not dealing with aggression or bullies and inappropriate behaviour effectively enough. That is, it's still continuing. So my response to that would be, has the behaviour stopped, or is my child still feeling scared and anxious and being physically intimidated? If there's ongoing problems, if the problem clearly has not been addressed so that it is stopping, then you either go back to the school and say things need to change, or if you're, and not everybody is, but if you're in a position where you have the resources or the freedom to choose, find somewhere else. Because clearly that particular school might not be doing the job that they need to.
So we had a wonderful experience sort of in the realm of this with our 8-year-old school recently where he got into a a tussle.
A tussle over football.
An
Yeah.
altercation.
Yes.
There
He and
was
another
an-
child did not see eye to
There
eye.
was an incident and it did get physical. Our son was actively involved in that, as was the other child. School handled it absolutely beautifully. So very beautifully. And they have a time. Basically, if there is any physical contact in our school, purple slips straight away, which means you go to the room where there's a teacher and you have to talk it out. You are sat down with the child and you have to have a conversation. And both parents are sent a note home that has to be signed and returned to the school in order for the incident report to be closed off. So we only found out that this happened when the note came home.
Yeah, because our child had forgotten to tell us through the process. So they then followed it up to make sure that we knew and that we'd had the conversation. And in the end, when we got to them, they said, look, we believe the situation was sorted on the day. So that's why we're not panicked about it. We spoke to them. They apologised to each other. We didn't feel like it went too far. Everything was good. We just want you to know that it happened and here's where it's at. Here's the consequences.
So, some things don't need to be turned into mountains.
Yeah, exactly.
But when it keeps on going, that's when we've got to dive in. And it sounds like your school's doing a great job.
Yeah.
If only they all did like that.
Yeah, exactly. If only they all did like that. And that's it. It takes a village to raise a child, and our school community is a part of that village. And we do need them on side, both to help our children where they're the aggressor, to learn a different way, and if our child is the victim, to help them actually survive or cope in that kind of environment as well.
So the moral of the story is, if your 5-year-old gets punched in the face, hunt down the other child. That's not where we.
at all.
No, okay.
Dr. Justin Coulson, happyfamilies.com.au. Thanks for kind of talking this out with us. We appreciate it.
Great to be here.
And there are loads of resources to help at happyfamilies.com.au as you seek to be the best parent you can. And if you think Dr. Justin Coulson might be suitable to speak at your school, event or organisation, you can find out more about how to book him in at justincoulson.com.